Good?
Are you dressing up for
All
Halloween?
right. I hereby open the special meeting regarding the Agenda Bill 18111, Resolution 1461, approving the Salish Expansion Plan Residential and Plan Commercial Industrial Master Plan PCI 18-0001, and adopting the Planning Commission's findings of facts, conclusions, law, and recommendations, recommended conditions of approval. This was introduced on 8/27, and discussion continues tonight. With that, I'll turn it over to the city attorney to kick things off.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. As we have with each of the previous meetings on Salish, I'd like to poll council members as to whether or not you've received any or been party to any ex parte communications or off-the-record emails, telephone calls, in-person conversations with either proponents or opponents of the proposed Salish expansion project. Councilmember Jeans.
No.
Councilmember Ross.
No.
And so I should clarify, I'm just talking about the time period from the last meeting, which was Monday until tonight, Wednesday. Councilmember Holloway.
No.
Councilmember Mayhew.
No.
Councilmember Lassay.
I received an email that I forwarded on. I don't know if that's the question that we're asking right now, but I was also asked by a current planning commissioner what the progress status was, and I indicated I'm not at liberty to discuss that.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Sundwall.
No.
Councilmember Shepherd.
No.
All right.
All right, with that, I'll turn it over to Jason Rogers.
Thank you, Mayor. So we sent you some stuff. We sent 3 documents yesterday about 5 o'clock. One was a draft resolution 1461. A second is a listing of all the proposed changes to findings, conclusions, and conditions. And the third one was a copy of the Planning Commission's Resolution 2018-01, which contains the Planning Commission findings.
Do we have copies of all those? I only see the changes to the,
In
In your
inbox.
inbox.
I like paper.
I think Mark's going to run and get it.
Oh,
so-
the mailbox.
Yeah, right behind us. Mark will run and get it.
He's pretty fast. That was impressive.
Already gone. Anyway, so I thought I'd briefly start with the draft resolution 1461. This one is substantially similar to the Planning Commission's resolution. It has many of the same whereas statements and just walks through some of the procedural steps for this project and some of the dates. And then it gets into the meat of the resolution is Section 1 adopts the Planning Commission's findings of fact, conclusions of law, and recommended conditions of approval as the City Council's. Section 2 then makes additional and or modified findings, conclusions, and conditions, and that is encompassed in the second document I mentioned. And then this third section formally approves the Salish master plan. Obviously, we wrote this on the assumption that the council would be looking to approve this. If the council were to contemplate a different action, we would, of course, have to revise this, but we could do that. So getting to the second one, and the one that was distributed tonight is slightly different only in that it contains some parts in italics, which contains the rationale for every one of these changes. I want to emphasize this is for illustrative purposes only. This is not the version that would go with the resolution. The one I sent you yesterday is what would go because it is the actual text with no additional filler. But the one that I distributed is helpful to the council, or rather could be helpful to the council to understand why you're seeing certain individual changes, because they may seem repetitive at times, or that or that they simply don't seem to relate to anything the council discussed. I can step through these one by one because I know this is new for the council to see actual language here.
Hey, Mr. Mayor, just a procedural question so we understand what we're doing for the next hour and whatever that adds up to. So is our goal to get through as far as, it's kind of like I do with the spreadsheet in prior meetings, just to get through this as far as we can tonight?
That is
And
our
then pick
hope.
it up again Monday when we don't? Is this the operating document right here?
What are you looking at?
Sorry, the changes to the conclusions and conditions.
Findings.
So we're working on the assumption that hopefully you've all had a chance by now to read the Planning Commission's findings, because what this second document, the one you have in front of you, does is make changes to the Planning Commission's findings.
Right.
So
Okay.
this is really the important one.
Okay.
Just the findings or the?
Well, it's the findings and the conclusions and the conditions. So my plan was to go through these one by one, and we can discuss
That's
it.
what I thought. I just want to make sure that's what we're headed toward.
Can I ask a question?
Councilmember
And the
Ross.
findings are complete?
They would, yes.
This captures everything the council discussed.
Yes, this is everything.
Okay.
Councilman Hussain.
And just, so we're all clear, maybe, and including myself. What's in this summary with the information is then captured in the full document as well, or is this still the same as the planning commission's?
They have not been merged.
Okay, so this larger one that you sent out, which is the 33 pages or whatever.
Yeah, it's this
Is the
exact.
same one that was in section 25 of our booklet?
Correct.
Okay.
All right.
All right, if we're ready to proceed.
So, under the heading findings, this is page 1. The number 1 is, so we're simply crediting Ms. Salgado's name. We inadvertently, it was probably a glitch on my part because my daughter's name is Madeline, so I inserted that even when her name is not Madeline, in fact. Sounds similar, but not. The second one would be to modify finding 38 to adjust the parking count from, it says up, the current language reads up to 400 stalls, and they would replace that with approximately 430. This is based on the council's discussion of parking. You'll recall that we had inadvertently omitted the parking for the managed residences, and so that's an additional 30 stalls right there. The third one would be to modify finding.
Or hold on, if there's no objection, we'll move on. Councilmember Sunwell?
I don't think it's an objection. I understand where we got the 30. I'm just trying to understand why it was an up to at one point, and now it's an approximately. It may eventually mean nothing, but why wouldn't it remain an up to, just adding those 30 in?
If you'll recall from the discussion, there's an allowed range of parking for this project, which is from, I believe, 378 stalls up to 400, or it's 300 some odd up to 478 at the maximum based on the city's parking code. And so in theory, the project could provide some number of stalls within that range. The master plan as shown is about 430, it's 434 is what they're showing. So hence the approximately to give, when they actually go to design this, they may end up with 437 or they may end up with 431. So
Okay, thank
we don't
you.
want to limit them here.
Okay, if there's no objection, we'll move on to the next one then. And I don't mean objection to this matter, I mean objecting about moving on. So, all right, next item.
Okay, the third one, modify finding 46. This modification here would change the description of the eventual build-out of the hotel component. If you recall, there was an in-depth discussion about the managed residences and then how phase 3 of the hotel could be constructed. And so the two options for that would be 89 hotel rooms and 30 managed residences, or 0 hotel rooms and 60 managed residences. And so we added language here to clarify that the total build-out is going to be either 93 hotel rooms and 60 managed residences, that's phase 1, 2, 3, or it would be 182 hotel rooms and 30 managed residences, again, phases 1, 2, and 3, and it's all dependent on how phase 3 gets built.
Which,
Number 3, it's on page 1.
oh, yeah.
Councilor
I
Lasay?
thought you were in 4.
This isn't really a question, but I think it also leads credence to the change in the previous one where you say approximate 430 because the difference in scenarios could lead to differences in parking
Correct.
totals. Okay.
The scenario with more managed residences and fewer hotel rooms would require less parking.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, if there's no questions or further concerns on this item, okay, Councilmember Jeans?
So I guess in this phase 3, it'll be based on after 1 and 2 gets built, and they get to be operating, and they see what the market is, and they see where they're going. They're going to go one or the other, and that sounds makes basic good sense to me. It seems to me the word approximately in front of all of those numbers seem more appropriate than hard numbers like 93 hotel rooms and 60 managed residences. Perhaps the word approximately, I mean, a lawyer might say that creates vagueness. We better have certainty, but I'm comfortable with the word approximately. What do you think?
Councilman Osei.
I think being that this has gone through several years and changes to the development agreement, and the applicant has been precise in how they want to build out the development. They've been forthright in the number of rooms and been consistent in the number of rooms. I think it would behoove us to stay with that and not create any vagarity, and then have to then come back if it changes. And that way it's specific and it's definite, and it's a known quantity. A fluctuation of 1 or 2 hotel rooms might not be a big deal, but it does have impact and spirals out throughout the whole agreement.
Well said.
Councilman Sunwell.
I would also add to that I think if they needed that number to vary, they could come back to us for, I'm going to use the wrong term, for a variance from that.
Or deviation.
But deviation from that. But if we allow a proximity, then then we've given them license automatically to vary from that in some degree. So that's just, I guess, probably another way of saying what Councilmember Lissay said.
I'll ask Bob Sturbank to jump in.
Just to call the council's attention to the Planning Commission recommended condition number 3. This is attached to their, it's the 32-page findings and conclusions that were attached to Planning Commission Resolution 2018-01. That condition would call for the details of the build-out.
Page 29.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, page 29 of that document, recommended condition number 3, would call for the details of the development in subsequent approvals to substantially conform to the details of what's authorized in the master plan. And that language, substantially conform, was used deliberately to provide the community director some flexibility, just as Councilmember Jeans suggested, if they adjust things a slight bit in one direction or the other. It does, in addition to substantial conformance being referred to as defined by code provisions, include some hard caps so that there would be some assurance about the total number of residential units not exceeding 150, the total number of hotel rooms not exceeding 182, a couple of other things that you see called out there. So we were trying to have a blend of, a certain amount of flexibility for the applicant and the director to finalize the details with some certainty for council and members of the public as to what particular parameters would not be exceeded.
I actually had a question for the applicant and for Bob Sturbank that I didn't get a chance to clarify earlier. On this flexibility built in this, I know the hospitality industry, as we saw through the recession, can be fairly volatile in terms of the demand. So once the hotel is built, does this flexibility still continue to where if the market kind of shifts through the years, you can roll back to convert some into additional condominium units, or if demand for hospitality increases, roll back to more hotel units, or how does this work once a hotel is actually built? I mean, one of these scenarios, there's some spectrum in between. Once it's built, it's set in stone, or does it still allow for flexibility?
Either the first degree would be substantial conformance, second degree is a possible amendment. We wouldn't know until that occasion happened. Then we would go back through from the development agreement through the master plan, through the BSIP, through the plat, and figure out what needed to be changed. So it's hard to answer that today, but it wouldn't be just the market change, so therefore you can capture the flexibility in the development agreement. It's where are you at in the process and what would it affect?
I'm strictly talking about after the hotel is built. Is whatever formula they arrive at the time of the construction of the hotel, it's now completed, it's open for business, is that formula now set in stone, or is there still some room, flexibility depending on market conditions and demand?
Yeah, I think I understand the question. Rachel Nathanson on behalf of the Muckleshoot Tribe. That would not be very it wouldn't be likely. A hotel gets built with a completely different makeup and scenario and design than the managed residential units. It would probably require a complete change of use, and that, we believe, would need to come back to the city for approval of some nature. It would have to go through some sort of review and approval.
Okay.
So it's certainly not our intention to go that route.
So just even the physical environment would sort of set it in stone wherever you arrive?
To a certain extent, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or discussion on this item, council? All right, let's proceed. Oh, Councilmember Ross?
I have a question. So under, you just pointed out number 3, under proposed conditions, will this proposed conditions change to another title once this is all approved? Is it like required conditions, or what proposed means? It's like you can change it.
If the city council were to adopt it, they would not be proposed, they would be just conditions.
Okay, okay, good.
All right, moving on to item 3, modify finding 46.
That's the one we were on.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, we're on to number 4.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're correct.
So number 4, modify finding 47 to read as follows, and the change is actually on the second page, and this is actually a minor one. It's adding the word gross in front of the word density, and to clarify that the calculation is gross density, and revise it from 4 to 5 because the number is 5 dwelling units per acre. If you divide 150 units over the 29.6 acres of the residential component, it's 5 units per. It's 5.01 units per acre.
Councilmember Summel?
In that calculation, you divided what by 5?
150 residential units in 29.6 acres, 30 acres.
And that 30 acres
Is the residential.
does or does not count open space designations?
It does count. That's why we also add the word gross density,
Okay.
because gross encompasses the entire site.
That's what we mean by gross. Okay.
Versus net density would take out things like open space and
Roads
roads
and
and
stuff.
parks
Okay.
and those things.
All right, any other discussion or questions on this item, council?
Because that was a question you had about how that was calculated.
All right, moving on to item 5.
Hold on a second, Mayor. We shouldn't be having side conversations today. I just wanted to confirm that one of the council members had a question on this item and that there isn't any, that the clarity is there.
Councilmember Mayhew, did you have a question, or?
Yes.
So, while he's doing that, so the calculation of 5 dwelling units per acre obviously means that it's going to be more condensed than that because we haven't taken into account roads and open space, right?
Correct.
So we're going to have 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever houses per acre, once you strip that out.
For net density, yes. And it's
What's the net acreage on that property?
undetermined at this time because they haven't designed the residential plat.
But isn't open space and roads a percentage, or at least open spaces?
Snoqualmie Ridge 2, for example, uses a blanket 30% as an assumption, so you can certainly apply that. I have not applied, I haven't done the math.
30% is roads, wetlands, other unbuildable areas.
Correct.
Steep slopes or whatever, yeah.
Okay, so 9 acres. Okay. Did you, Mr. Mayhew, are you ready to ask your
He
question?
said he was ready to
Sorry,
go.
it was the, I don't want to talk until I'm called on.
Go ahead, Councilmember Lissay.
It was the matrix item number 9, which actually was Councilmember Shepherd's concern. I just want to make sure that's been taken care of.
Okay, moving on to item 5.
Okay, item 5, modify finding 57. And this one talks about the visibility of the hotel from the Snoqualmie Falls observation deck and from the end of the pedestrian bridge. We're adding some language here to clarify what is blocking the view, because in one case from the observation deck, grade changes in terrain are blocking the view, and from the end of the pedestrian bridge, it's a combination of terrain, grade changes, and trees. This is coming out of the council's discussion about trees, which is item number 1 on the issue matrix, and also item number 4, although that discussion happened as part of number 1.
Councilmember Ross?
I think part of the discussion, and you have it here, is a tree management plan, but it's not included in the wording.
So these are the findings, and so we're starting with here's facts, then we'll draw some conclusions later, and then there's a condition at the very end, which we'll get to. So this modification is to support the new condition requiring a tree management plan.
Councilmember Simo.
I don't get that.
So,
I'm
So
sorry,
is
I'm
it
sorry.
going to state
Let's-
there's a tree management plan?
No.
Or what?
No, so Mayor?
Yeah, go ahead.
So the way the Planning Commission decision was put together, and this is building from that, is there's a series of findings of fact that where the Planning Commission found facts A, B, and C exist, or that will exist based on the application. Based on those findings, there's a set of conclusions of law that look at, here's the legal requirement in Code Section A, and based on this finding, that code section is met. And then the third component is a set of conditions that says, we recommend the council approve this, subject to conditions 1 through whatever the number is that go along with this. As Jason was explaining, this is a finding that will be used to buttress a recommended conclusion when you get to page, second to last page.
In this document, it's under conditions of approval, new condition, item 5.
What page, Mark?
Right, on the.
No page numbers, but
It's
it's the
page
second to
7.
last.
No, it is page 7.
Oh, you're in the.
So
Oh, I
that
see.
it's a proposed new condition that speaks to the requirement for Community Development Director approval of a tree management plan, the timing of that plan, and the components of it. So
Thank you.
what Mr. Rogers was just on was sort of the factual foundation for that subsequent proposed new condition.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on this item? Okay, with that, we'll move on to item 6.
All right, item 6, this would be a new finding, and you can see the text there. This one would, and this is about the excuse me, the largest potential event the facility could host, and that combined with the regular hotel patronage and the event, and of course the employees, that the parking demand for such an event may exceed the parking supply. We don't have any information to say it will, but it may. This is coming out of the council's discussion about parking and the concern about spillover parking into the expanded lower parking lot for the Snoqualmie Falls or into the residential neighborhood. So similar to what we just talked about with this finding is being made to support later conclusions and conditions that will get us a parking management plan.
Gotcha.
so,
Yeah, go ahead.
so with these last two, we have modified or created these findings that the solution to those findings will be conditions. So in number 5, the condition is a tree management plan. And this particular, to satisfy this new finding, the condition will be a parking management plan, which will be addressed later in this document.
Correct.
Correct. Okay, got it.
Councilmember Jeans.
So since this is a new item, will that appear under the findings of fact as number 77, since there's 76 facts so far?
Most likely, yes. That's something we'll look at.
We'll give these numbers in the final document that we present to council so that it's very clear for future reference. If someone wants to refer to the finding regarding trees or parking, that it'll have a number.
Councilmember Shepherd.
So for an event that's going to have more cars than available parking, currently you have a valet process. You're probably going to be using a valet process for large events in general, right? So you're going to have to identify parking elsewhere in the city, maybe.
So you're jumping ahead maybe a little bit to the condition about the parking management plan. One of the reasons for the condition, as the staff is proposing it, and one of the reasons for this finding is that there's no information in the record about how the applicant may address a parking issue, and so lacking that information in the record, that we can't make specific. We can't draw specific conclusions about what the applicant would or would not do in that event. Hence the condition about developing management plan later, because then they can address those things. Certainly, the method you just stated may be one of the strategies they would employ. There are certainly others, but we can't specifically point to any at this point in time because of the record being closed.
Any further questions or concerns in this section, last item, under findings? Item 6. All right, with that, we'll move on to conclusions.
All right,
Number
so
one.
the first one, modify conclusion of law number 1 to read, to essentially cite some specific municipal codes. Oh, I'm sorry, Mayor, I believe.
Mayor, you moved too fast for me on the last one.
I'm sorry,
had
I
a
couldn't hear you.
question.
We can't hear you.
You just moved too fast for me on the last one.
Okay, we get back up. Which item?
This is number 6, but the reason I'm just bouncing around between these different, I have a concern that I think needs to be addressed somewhere, which is how they're going to make sure that hotel meetings don't have participants, not employees, but participant parking overflow into
The falls.
the residential area or
That's the purpose.
residential area in particular. And so I just don't know, is that where,
So,
I'm just sort of bouncing back between the number 6 and in the conditions. I'm just trying to figure out where to.
I would say stay tuned when we get to that
Thank you.
condition.
Okay, fine.
It's
Thank you.
coming.
Okay.
This is building up to it.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So that's why I got confused. Is
Can't
when
you
to
feel
bring
the
it.
energy?
I
mean,
do.
it's just
I do feel
building
the
like
energy.
a volcano.
It is, yes.
It's like college game day.
It is.
In Pullman.
Okay. Okay, so conclusions. The first modified conclusion would be to cite some specific code sections that detail the process for a master plan application of this type. So it's the pre-application, submit the application, planning commission review, planning commission public hearing, planning commission recommendation, city council decision, which is important because the planning commission conclusions, of course, don't address directly that the city council gets to make the decision. They get up to planning commission recommendation, kind of stop there. So that's why this change is made.
Councilmember Sunwell.
So I was following along beautifully on the findings. So number 1 here that we're now working on under conclusions, does that map to conclusions of law 1?
Yes.
And so 1A and 1B would supersede 1 now?
Yeah, what we would do is,
I don't really see a red line, so it looks to me like it's just completely replacing.
Yeah, actually, my apologies, we did not get the first portion of the existing conclusion.
So where does this
one,
start?
Cut and paste it in. This would follow the existing conclusion 1.
So it's additive?
Correct.
Got
additive,
it, okay.
correct. So then there would be A and B following the paragraph that we have there already.
Okay.
So
thank
we'll
you.
correct that for Monday then? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Councilmember Sunwell. Any other questions or discussion for this item? Item 1, A or B? All right, moving on to, go ahead, Councilmember Sunwell.
So just in case it's not obvious, this goes back to the numbering thing. I would ask for the sake of consistency that if there are, that added, I guess it looks like there's only 1. I would ask you to add that to the end rather than screw up the numbers. We've sort of grown accustomed to just add it to the end.
we'd be adding this on to the end of the existing number 1, so it would be part of.
No, I'm sorry. I need to back up further. So on the modification, the one we added, number 6, the new finding, add that to the end rather than offsetting everything by 1, in case that wasn't obvious.
Yeah, we have enough cross-references within this document. We don't want to mess that up, so.
Thank you.
Councilmember Dosay.
I don't want to tell you how to do it, but if I may offer a suggestion. It's pretty clear in the way this is structured that there is a section, and I can't flip to it really fast, but it talks about findings from the Planning Commission during deliberations. Mm-hmm. This one, I think, would qualify under the findings by council during deliberations. It might be as easy, well, it's basically what it is. It goes to the end, but it's under that sort of heading. So you don't have to finger it in somewhere. You can just put it at the end under that title and you'd probably be fine.
Exactly.
Anyway,
Okay.
that's my management side coming
And
on.
would accurately capture the record, too. All right, are we ready to move on to item 2 under conditions? Go ahead, Jason.
Okay, number 2 would be to modify conclusion number 3, to add quite a bit to this. It would first clarify the requirements of this code section and how the project responds to it. So it goes into some detail there, but the long and short of it is the project does comply with this requirement.
Councilmember Summel, and then Ross.
Are examples of at least 3 housing types, so a housing type would be a single-family home, a townhome, a duplex, a condo, are those what you mean by types?
Correct, that's what the code specifies.
So there has to be at least 3 types. Okay, got it.
I know in Snoqualmie Ridge, we had a requirement of a minimum of 3 different floor plans, and each floor plan had to have a minimum of 3 different looks or elevations. Are we applying that same sort of a?
That's not being applied here. That's something the council could certainly discuss as part of the residential development and design standards later.
All right.
But it's,
That's partially due to the 150 homes as part of this as opposed to 1850.
Yeah, okay.
But some variation will be.
You
built
answered
in.
my question. I don't want to take more time. Councilmember Ross, and then Councilmember Jean, do you have your hand up?
So,
Or Councilmember Hawley?
I do. On that, it shows finding of fact number 39. I was wondering if that's the right finding of fact. Is it?
let me check.
It is not.
It would not be, but we'll fix that.
Okay.
I will point out there are actually some other small errors. For example, there's a duplicated word at one point, a couple other typos that we found that we're simply not showing here because they're minor, and we'll get them fixed.
Should be 47, I believe, just so you know.
Is it 47?
I believe so.
Yeah, it mentions 46 later on. Is that one typo?
Yeah, 46
Yeah,
was correct.
that's the hotel.
Councilmember Hallway.
So is a managed residential unit a townhome, duplex, condominium, or multi?
This conclusion is specifically about the residential portion and not the hotel portion.
That's the misreference.
Right.
So this conclusion does not apply to the hotel component, which includes the managed residences.
Okay.
All right, if there's nothing else, no further questions or comments on this item, we'll move on to item number 3 under conditions.
All right. Number 3, modify conclusion 4. Just a quick cleanup there. It's not so much that the code section requires a mix of residential and site, because that's the previous one. This one specifies the ranges, so it specifies certain percentages. So for example, you can have one housing type between, I believe, 40 and 75% of the total number of units, and then specifies a breakdown for the remaining units. So this is designed to get, instead of just requiring have 3 housing types and you have one townhouse, one duplex, and a whole bunch of single family, you have to have an actual not significant, but a good number of these other housing types. You can't just build 99% of one type.
That is fact number 47, not 46, by the way.
Right.
Correct. That one's supposed to be 47.
All right, any other comments or discussion on Councilmember Lissay on item number?
So I just want to make sure, so that one on this number 3-1, it should say fact number 47?
Right.
Okay.
Correct. Same is true for the preceding one, and the last one, the reference to 46 should be 47.
Should be 47 also? Okay.
Correct.
Actually, I think the one that's on the previous one, the one that says see finding fact 39 is actually referring to
47.
the
No,
site.
to 40, because it's referring to the size of the site, which is finding of fact 40,
Yeah,
Okay.
the acreage.
that's right.
And then the one that says 46 should be 47?
47.
47.
Gotcha. So this one needs some modification too.
All right, with that, if there's no further questions or discussion, we'll move on to item 4, modify conclusion 5 to read
All
as
right.
follows.
This one is adding a cross-reference to conclusion 10 for further discussion. This is simply improving clarity of the conclusion. Conclusion 10 is the conclusion that discusses what area height and setback requirements would generally apply to residential lots of different sizes.
Councilmember Lissay? Councilmember Hall, will you have your hand up, or?
I'm trying to get the sequence. So if we've got findings of fact, conclusions of law, and conditions, and if you're in your findings of fact and you're not referencing anything because they're findings of fact.
Right.
In conclusions of law, we're referencing back to the findings of fact. It seems odd to be referencing
Conclusion.
down to a condition.
It's a conclusion.
It's a conclusion.
Okay,
It's
it
just,
is-
it's
So it's a
referencing
conclusion
another-
that's later in the thing. Okay, I bear that.
Yeah.
You're right, it says conclusion, not condition. Okay.
Yeah, if you'll recall from the density discussion, there was talk about, well, what if you cluster everything together? And then, we talked about how the minimum lot size requirement comes into play. So it's adding that reference to help kind of link them together into one whole.
My mistake, I was reading it as saying condition and it says conclusion, so, got it.
All right, if there's no further questions or discussions on item 4, we'll move on to item 5.
Number 5 would be just adding reference to finding of fact number 47 here to help strengthen the conclusion essentially and refer it to a specific fact.
In the 5A units per acre.
Correct.
Which we already discussed.
All right, if there's no questions or discussion on this, we'll move on to item number 6, modified conclusion 33 as follows.
I
So-
think, I'm sorry, is 47 correct?
Yeah, at the very bottom of 47, if you
Yeah.
look.
Yeah, and you'll recall
But it's not corrected.
it is corrected. Finding number
this-
number 4 under findings, modify finding 47 to add gross density of 5 units per
He's saying
acre.
item 47 will be corrected to 47, and then
It's
this will be
corrected
corrected.
here in the sheet we got tonight. It's not corrected in the fat packet yet, because this is the one from the binder.
But you'll get that corrected, correct, Jason?
Correct.
All right, so we're on to item number 6.
Which one's different?
Councilmember
Finding
Ross,
fact
are
number
you-
47 is-
Councilmember Ross, are you satisfied? Has your question been answered?
This is what I got today, the finding of fact. So which number is it? It's not 47 or it is 47?
Finding of fact 47 is the correct reference to support that conclusion.
Bottom of page 1 of today's packet shows you the modified finding of 47 will read as, and that's where it's changed from 4 to 5 dwelling units. So in the packet
Right.
you got today, the
Right.
7-pager, the bottom of page 1, it's referring to finding 47 being changed. Okay?
Right.
And then where we are now in conclusion 6, number 5, it's just referring back to the corrected number 47, which is on page 1.
Oh.
Councilmember Lasser.
I think what your question is what I asked at the beginning is, the thicker packet that you got received today that started at the top with resolution 2018-1 is exactly as it exists in the book.
Right.
So that hasn't been updated to match the narrative that we've been given that we're going through item number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that one just hasn't been updated
For
in the
dwellings, okay,
big
there it
booklet
is.
yet. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, on to item number 6 then.
All right. Item number 6, modify conclusion 30 to add. So this conclusion is talking about parking. And so it would say the hotel and associated facilities, including the managed residences, which we had some discussion about, would provide approximately, here's the approximately 430 parking spaces coming back, and has a reference to that finding, which we, of course, previously modified.
So for parking spaces,
Councilmember Shepherd?
don't we have like a formula of how we decide how many parking spaces that we're supposed to have?
Yes, that's laid out in the issue matrix under number 2. One of the more recent staff responses has the calculation. It's, in short, it's 1 per hotel room, 1 per condominium unit, and then there is no requirement for the event space, the various event space and the spa, and so staff, per the code, applied a retail parking requirement to that, which is relatively high.
Councilmember Sunwell?
He did
Gotcha.
he said that.
So
Councilmember Shepherd?
So do we have somewhere where they have to go back to that when they submit their residential plan as far as parking?
there's a condition in the Plan Commission recommended which requires the project conform to Chapter 17.65, which is the parking code.
All right.
All right, see, Councilman Lasay.
This is a minor item, but I don't know if it would ever come up to be an issue, but shouldn't the SMC be in front of Chapter 17?
Not for chapter.
Okay.
Title 17 SMC, or excuse me,
So
SMC Title 17, Chapter 17.65 SM. Yeah, it's.
Okay.
I know it's confusing.
Hey.
All right, if there's no further questions or discussion on this item, we'll move on to item 7.
Number 7, modify conclusion 38, and so this is where we're picking up the finding about how the terrain and trees are screening the hotel from view from the Snoqualmie Falls view observation deck and the end of the pedestrian bridge. And here, the conclusion notes retention of the trees is therefore important to ensure the screening of the project site from the Snoqualmie Falls TCP. So now we're taking it a step further, whereas instead of saying, here's the fact the trees are screening it, now we're saying the trees are important to screen it. So this will build on into the condition you'll see later.
Councilmember Sunwell.
So I'm just trying to reflect on, let me back up. So the trees that are being referred to that are screening the view from the falls, are those trees being referred to as trees that are on the falls side of 202 or on the parcel in question's side of 202?
The parcel in question.
The project site.
The project site.
Okay. Okay, perfect, got it.
Okay, if there's no further discussion or questions on this item, we'll move on to item 8.
All right, number 8. This is just adding some cross references to different findings to support the conclusion. This conclusion specifically is one of the ones addressing comprehensive plan compliance. So there are references to findings concerning open space and then further findings concerning the visual impact or lack thereof.
All right, if there's no further questions or comments on this item, we'll move on to item, Councilmember Lasay.
Can you just pause for just a second?
Sure.
I want to make sure I'm up to speed on this one, because it
Go
references
ahead.
other findings.
I'll give it another minute or so, 30 seconds or so.
Thank you.
Yeah, Council, any of you, please don't hesitate to stop me if you want to, if you're just trying to get your bearings and.
We won't.
The challenge is that I'm looking at conditions of law and findings and facts, and I'm getting the wrong numbers. That's why I'm trying to, just need a minute.
Understood. And if you're finding typos, errors, those are good to catch, so.
Is 39 correct on there?
Yes. 39 is specifically referring to the project as proposed in the master plan is less intense than that allowed by the development agreement, which speaks directly to the language in the conclusion.
Isn't 39 talking about the number of hotel rooms?
Yes. The conclusion reads, and I'm only in relevant part, and provides for fewer hotel and residential units than allowed by the amended and restated development agreement.
Okay, there it is.
Okay. All right, seeing that there's no further discussion or questions on this item, we'll move on to item 8. I think on 8, right?
Number 9.
That was
Or
it.
number 9, sorry.
This would be a new conclusion, and this is carrying on from the modification we made to conclusion number 1, which is to specify that the city council makes the decision on this. You are the deciding body and will decide whether to approve or disapprove of this project.
Councilmember Sunwell.
I guess I don't remember this one being discussed. I mean, isn't that what the law says?
I thought it was kind of restating the obvious, but
Yeah, admittedly, it's restating the obvious, but it's also, sometimes you need to do that.
Makes us feel better. Okay. I feel better already.
good. That's its purpose.
Feel important, not better.
All
Important.
right, moving on to item 10.
Does help me feel better, though.
Number 10, so this would modify this conclusion quite substantially because, so this conclusion addresses mitigations, both funding that's required as mitigation and improvements. And so the significant addition here is about mitigation measure 27 in the mitigated determination of non-significance, which is, if you recall, the one about improvements to the SR 18 I-90 interchange. We had a substantial discussion about this and how the improvements referred to in the MDNS was the traffic signal at the end of the eastbound off-ramp from I-90 to State Route 18. That improvement was completed in 2007. It was fully funded by WashDOT, and so the Gateway and/or the Muckleshoot Indian Tribe, as proponents of the Salish project, never had to pay for it. This interaction was picked up in the initial development agreement, but because the condition was essentially fulfilled, it was not carried forth into the amended and restated development agreement because it was, of course, not necessary then. So there's quite a bit of discussion about that. There's also an addition here, section 3.6.4 of the amended and restated development agreement says that the Muckleshoot Indian Tribe shall pay their share of Snoqualmie Parkway widening. This is south of 96th Street as it goes down the steep hill toward I-90. And this was because that portion of the parkway was widened as part of Snoqualmie Ridge 2. And it says an amount equivalent to 5% of the total cost, not to exceed $37,500. This is essentially what you could consider a latecomers agreement. That money is required to be paid when they get their hotel building permit.
Councilmember Sunwall.
So this is a lot. So so it sounds like the Muckleshoot Indian Tribe shall pay a share of the Snoqualmie Parkway lane widening from the current 2 lanes to 4 lanes south of 96. That's already happened, right?
Yeah.
So this isn't talking about
Well,
2 lanes to get on
the
I-90.
The improvement has happened. The payment is not due until the building permit issuance.
Okay. But that's outside of city limits, so who are they paying?
No, it's,
That's it.
Part of ours. Yeah, we got a little strip.
The parkway's actually in city limits, even though on the east side of the parkway, the boundary of the right-of-way is the city limit. So the former Leisure Time site.
Gotcha.
And those properties that surround it are not in the city, but the parkway itself, right-of-way, is
Okay.
within the city.
Okay. So this is about a project that's already done, and at some point, they will need to repay us for that once the hotel is built. And that thing has to be at least 15 years old, because I've lived here almost that long.
No,
The 4 lanes?
not that section.
That section of the parkway would have been improved sometime in the post-2005 when Snoqualmie Ridge 2 was approved.
2007.
So, yeah, probably around 2007. We don't have an exact date of when
Okay.
it was constructed.
But it was a long time ago. Okay.
But yeah, it was a long time ago.
Or early 2008.
So there was a latecomers agreement on that to pay?
I use that as as kind of a relevant example of what this is similar to in this case. That
There is a latecomer agreement for that improvement that has an exhibit attached to it called benefited properties. That's not the driving instrument. The driving instrument for this is that it's in the development agreement.
In a latecomer agreement, if there was a mechanism like that, would not go to us, it would pay the developer, yeah. We are simple, we play the role of basically the mediator conduit between different developers when it comes to collecting and paying latecomers fees. And actually, maybe that's a merit, just a 101 in latecomers fees for those that don't understand. It's as if you're putting a big sewer line down a road and someone wants to build half a mile down the road and there's nothing built in between that home. You don't want them running a 12-inch line or a 6-inch line out to that home a half mile down the road only to build houses in between that require an upgrade to that line to a 12-inch, say. it's not efficient. So you require that person to put a 12-inch line in, and their protest is, hey, why am I paying for a 12-inch line all the way out to my house when I'm only a need for 6? So they pay for it, but then you build into that a latecomer agreement, which means for all those subsequent developments that come in, they have to pay that individual, reimburse that first developer or first home builder for the cost of that investment. And so that's a mechanism used in communities all over. So it doesn't, that way it doesn't burden the city, it burdens the developers, but you're basically playing the role to equitably shift that money around. Councilmember Shepherd?
So is this referring to the original development agreement or the amended restated development agreement?
What portion? There's several things in here, so
The part where they want to, you want to have them spend, what, $30,000?
that's, that requirement to pay a share of that cost is in the amended and restated development agreement,
Okay.
section 3.6.4.
Any other questions or discussion on this item? Councilmember Mayhew?
Just want to be clear, that I had raised a question about the numbering on the community center payment, and is that fully resolved now?
Yes, I did run those down. So
Okay.
that's in the issue matrix, so that doesn't affect this, but I did run those down.
Okay, so this is fine, it refers to 3.7, I think that's the, well, anyway, you know, the point is that it's covered adequately here.
Yes.
Thank you.
Councilmember Sunderland?
What was that number?
It's 3.7, section 3.7.
No, I'm sorry, the amount of money.
1388 or something like that, per household? or unit?
13.88 million?
No, $1,388 or something to that, in that area, per unit.
Per unit.
$1,388 per residential dwelling unit.
Oh, I was close.
Excluded, yeah, you were very close. Excluding the affordable units.
Okay.
Multiplied by 150 or whatever unit, or 130 or whatever units they build.
So it's talking about community center mitigation payment. So 1,388
388.
per residential dwelling unit.
Not including the affordable housing.
About
unit.
200,000.
150
About 200,000.
150 units that were built less than 15% affordable
minus
housing.
15, so times 127 roughly,
175, 150.
whatever it ends up being.
So it'd be 120, call it 125
Yeah.
units to ballpark, and $161,000.
That's a lot of treadmills.
All right.
By Jim Aponi.
Any other questions on this item, council, or discussion? Are we ready to move on to conditions of approval? Seeing no objection?
All right. Condition of approval. So the first one is modify condition number 3, and the city attorney mentioned this one earlier. He read the the one as recommended by the planning commission, but we would modify this in light of the. You recall we modified a finding and modified a conclusion about the ultimate build out of the hotel, excuse me, the hotel component, and the differences in phase 3, and so we've modified the language to encompass both those two build out possibilities here.
Must be 55 grand.
In this way, they couldn't, because under the previous language, there was a concern that the applicant could theoretically build 182 hotel rooms and 60 managed residential units, which is not the intent, which is both not the proposal and not the intent.
Yeah, no, wait. More or less.
All right, if there's no other questions or comments on conditions of approval, item 1, we'll move to item 2. Councilmember Lissay, we're still on item 1 then.
Okay, so this has obviously been shortened. It says shall also include the following provisions. So it's only addressing A, B, C, removing D, and modifying, and no change to E.
Correct. So the part of, you can find number 3 in its entirety on page 29 of the planning commissions.
So
does E become D here?
Yeah, we would renumber it
Okay.
to E later, but
60 feet, we had the conversation about height, and the 60 feet is consistent with the other mentions of that height,
we'll get there.
because we were talking about 55 feet.
Oh, yeah, it is in there.
Because that talks
It's
about
60.
60.
It's 60 feet. Certainly, there was discussion about that. With
I just
lacking,
want to make sure we finished at 60 feet.
I believe so. Certainly, the council could certainly discuss it further if you like,
We'll
but
look at it when it comes up.
Councilmember Mayhew, do you have a question?
Well, I just still don't understand why we're not at 55 feet, which is what the applicant asked for. I just don't,
Appurtenances.
Those go above that.
that's
Those are
above.
in addition to
I just wanted to say that.
I thought the discussion that we had at council.
Well, we
was
did.
that there could be some, because of topography or the issues, there could be a slight variation, so we just give them that.
But I understand, but I'm sure they thought of that when they asked for 55 feet. I don't understand why the city would would increase what they asked for. They're just,
Because their proposed drawings are not exact civil engineer drawings, and when they actually do those, we are trying to, things often change by a slight bit, one direction or the other, and so we are trying to leave room for that to happen in between, given that the rest of this condition says substantially in conformance, except, and then we set some hard caps, and height being one of them. I mean, one thing you could do is take this height hard cap out entirely, and then the community development director can determine substantial conformance with respect to the conceptual drawings that were submitted as part of the application. We were trying to focus it down more than that.
yeah, but
Because
that's not
the
answering the question
allowable
I'm
height
asking.
is.
All of that doesn't answer the question I'm asking. What I'm saying is the applicant asked for 55 feet. Why aren't we saying yes to what they asked for?
Can I address this?
Terry, go ahead.
Councilmember Mayhew, Terry Danish on behalf of the Muckleshoot Tribe. So this is a master plan. Master plans are not engineered drawings. It's not specific. We didn't ask for 60 feet. We identified 55 feet because that's the approximate height of what we expect with regard to this development. And once the drawings are engineered, if you were to impose a 55-foot height limit, for example, and then our engineers drew it up, and because of topographical changes or whatever, grading, et cetera, it ended up being 56 feet that we needed, the limitation would obviously make that a challenge, unless, of course, as Attorney Sturbank pointed out, it would be given to the planning director for substantial conformance.
Yeah, so I understand why the height might change. That's not what's confusing me. I'm solely confused by, now maybe I had a wrong belief. I had the belief that the applicant asked for a particular height. Now, if that's where I'm wrong, if they had just given some indications and we're working off some indications and saying, all right, we'll set a height, then I get it. If they asked for a specific height, which is what I thought, then I don't understand why we're going higher.
It wasn't that they asked for height, they represented that we think we're going to build this to 55.
About 55
feet.
Right, I think it's
But
a
then
different,
for
it
the-
might be semantics, but we identified 55 feet.
But
We
you didn't
didn't ask for, this is what we need and
didn't wanna
want.
You're the ones
we don't-
turning it into a limit.
We don't want
not-
to
they
burden the
didn't.
council and everybody with a process that would have to come back and go through a lengthy process
No, I understand
over
that.
5 feet.
That's not
Right,
my
which is why I
question
think the 60 feet was identified.
So they didn't say maximum 55. They said, here's something that we're planning to do, and you can see on it that it's about 55. And so we're the ones saying, well, all right, let's put a hard limit of 60. They didn't say that.
Knowing
We're
that they were
saying-
also representing that, hey, we're nervous that we could come in at 56 feet and.
No, I get that, but
Right,
they.
and also because the development agreement allows for more units and taller heights than they have proposed here, and so what we
No,
were
I
trying.
understand all that. That's not what I'm trying to ask.
You're wondering how was the decision made?
Yeah,
Who
I'm just
made
trying
the
to
decision?
understand how we got there.
Yeah.
I know there were 75 in the DA. I'm clear on all of that.
Right.
That's not where I'm,
I'd
I
have to
understand that,
I'd have to
I'm
look
just
at
trying to understand, I had the belief they asked for 55. I'm mistaken
I
in
got
that.
you.
No, staff prepared these recommended conditions for Planning Commission based on what we saw depicted here and our understanding of the relative conceptual nature of this as
So that's
opposed to.
us saying,
that's
we
us.
see that they're
Right.
in the range of about 55. They didn't set a hard limit. We're saying, well, we're going to set a hard limit, but we're going to give them some room here because we understand the nature of where they're at, and
Exactly.
that's where 60 is coming from.
Exactly.
Now I get it. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Sunwell, Councilmember Lissay, and then Jeans.
Yeah, I'll be very brief. I love 60 because I I don't think anybody wants to debate this in a year or 18 months or 2 years when it turns out to be 56. So that's, I get it.
Councilor Lissay?
I don't want to introduce anything that would potentially be seen as new information. I think we had some conversation about it. As an architect, I would probably do this at 59 feet 6 inches, because if I'm given 60 feet, I'm doing it as tall as I can, because my client will be happy, which I don't think introduces any new information. But at the same time, I have no issue with the 60 feet.
Councilor Jeans?
I don't know whether the city initiated this or the planning commission initiated this, but I certainly think we, the city council, can initiate this, which is the element of reasonableness. And with the recognition that the original agreement allowed for
75.
substantially more. So I'm just saying reasonableness is a good reason to do this.
Councilor Ross?
So I'm wondering if the 60 feet, if letter C should even be in this portion. Because here you're making definitive statements. It's going to be 182 hotel rooms and 30 managed residents, or 93 and 60. And project shall not be visible from Snoqualmie Falls. But here's 60 feet, and that requires a deviation down the road. So I thought, isn't there a whole listing of different things like setbacks and sidewalks and
Yeah.
things like that that require deviation?
So this condition specifically is laying out the bounds for what we're terming substantial conformance. And so this whole condition says that the community development director shall determine whether anything following this master plan is any permit they apply for is substantially in conformance with the master plan. And so it's putting some hard caps on the director's consideration of that. So if they came in with a hotel that's 183 units, the director would say that's not substantially in conformance, you can't do that. So if they came in with something that's 61 feet tall, he'd say, no, that's not substantially in conformance. So.
And you could still say no at 59 because it hasn't been approved yet. Right? We haven't approved it. Yet it has to go before a planning commission and.
Well.
60 gives us certainty. The discussion of planning commission was the other way around. What if they come in, what if we don't put a cap and they come in and say, well, the development agreement says 75? Then I would say, well, it substantially conforms because there's no criteria. So let's capture the height shown conceptually in the master plan with this number, and then that way if it came in and said, hey, it happens to be 65, the development agreement says 75, find that in substantial conformance, that this would govern. It wasn't so much planning commission's concern about 56, 57, 58. It was if the master plan shows 60 and below, you have that discretion for 60 and below. If it comes in at 61, 62, and they rely on the development agreement, this informs staff to say no.
Right, but there's a whole, I'm trying to find in the matrix where it has a listing of different things that have to go through approval, including setbacks and height and all those different things.
Right. Condition 5 says, in determining substantial conformance for the residential component, including individual residential units, the director shall be guided by the residential development design standards required by Condition 8.
That's administrative approval, correct?
Correct.
Which means this gives them guidance of what they can say yea or nay to.
So it
right.
doesn't have to come back to the council or planning commission to approve the 60-foot?
No. It would
No.
not come back to the council or the planning commission. I mean, in fact, the latitude of giving it another 5 feet here is to assure that it doesn't have to come back to the council or the planning commission. It gives the administrative staff the latitude to approve that internally.
So
Right, but it's more
but
than
this is
5
guidance.
feet, it's 15 feet, right? Isn't it supposed to be 45 foot? And then you're actually increasing it to 60?
the height limit in the zone is 40 feet, and this would allow 60. But as Mr. Hoffman stated, the development agreement allows 75 feet. So.
Right, I'm just wondering if there's going to be another area here that shows the exceptions that need to be approved.
You're concerned about this having conflicts with other sections, or?
No, I'm trying to find the matrix where you showed all of the
Conditions
that had to
Right,
be
so-
reviewed and approved.
Conditions, so That's for the residential, okay. There is other conditions that specifically address the deviations that are needed. So condition 16 says the requested deviation from the applicable chapter for maximum building height for the hotel is approved, and the maximum building height for the hotel and associated facilities shall be 60 feet. So that deviation is individually captured. The residential deviations are captured in condition 18, where it lists out the specific deviations and says they are approved subject to the council approval of the residential standards at a later date.
Okay.
I know, there's a lot.
Fine, leave it at
Councilmember Holloway?
All right, so I'm just confused because, let me first state, I'm in agreement with 60 feet. My procedural question there, though, is what finding or conclusion supports the introduction of the 60-foot limit? I could still say every managed residential unit must have a pink flamingo. I need to have a finding and conclusion that supports the requirement for a pink flamingo. If the development agreement says 75 feet, how am I introducing 60 feet without a finding or conclusion to support that? Maybe my question makes no sense, and you can tell me that, but.
Because as I think Jason has tried to explain, the development agreement allows a taller height.
Yep.
The code calls for the council to approve or approve with conditions the proposal. And so this condition is trying to make clear what the proposal is that you are approving, if that indeed is the council's decision to approve. What is that proposal? Is it what's allowed, or is it exactly what's shown on this page, which is not surveyed, or something else? It's just to provide clarity.
Right, but shouldn't I have a finding that says development agreement says 75, standard says 45, conclusion says we're in conflict, the constraint is 60?
I think all of those things are mixed in. We can have we can add new separate finding and conclusion that says that exactly. I think the pieces of the proposal are called out in existing findings, but it would take me a moment to.
Yeah, I'm not arguing the 60, I'm just arguing that the framework is there to solidify it.
It could provide a good narrative into the future. We understand that the findings in there legally get us to where staff needs to be when we review it. If everyone goes away and reads it, that story in a finding may be helpful.
I mean, it could be a finding as simple as, the development agreement, or during that process, the community expressed grave concerns about the height of the building and view impacts. The applicant was responsive to those concerns, and coming back with this new concept, they determined to, again, be respectful and responsive to the community concerns, and are now representing 55 feet, and we're trying to capture that in, and they certainly aren't protesting that.
Oh, again, I'm not arguing, I'm just making sure.
But you want some findings, like I just said, behind that.
I have an opponent that has a 65-foot bulldozer going through downtown, and I have a group of citizens with alternate facts. I'd like to avoid them.
And there wasn't anything during the, I guess the finding was as simple as the applicant found that 55 feet was sufficient, and we agreed. And we're giving them a little latitude to 5 feet to, to assure the engineering drawings. Councilor, let's say.
I was just going to say, I think it sounds like that maybe we can move ahead on this one if you come back with some analysis of the findings, and if it's applicable, and if we need to add a finding, then we can look at that at the next meeting.
I'm assuming that's required, Bob, to have a finding connected to these, or can you have them without a finding?
So, I can begin to address while the city attorney looks more at his things. So the height refers with respect to findings is essentially referred to indirectly, because one finding identifies who gives a presentation to the Planning Commission. This would be Mr. Hoffman, Ms. Salgado, and then Mr. Mitchell for the architect for the applicant. That presentation, which is in the record, you have it in your binder, has many of these drawings, including one that shows the conceptual drawing at height at 55 feet. In addition, the application materials are part of the record. They obviously show 55 feet. So I will grant you it's indirect, but it is there. The information is in the record that shows 55 feet. There's a specific conclusion in here, which is number 21, that talks about height. It says the hotel project as proposed would be approximately 55 feet tall. Therefore, a deviation to the PCI zone maximum height limit of 40 feet is required. So-
That's his point, though. That gets you to 55.
Councilmember, if you could speak to the microphone, we kept,
So-
make sure capture.
I'm just trying to get you to 60.
Right, well, I think the development agreement approval to 75 already is an approval of a deviation from that, from the code height limit, since it was approved by council long ago. However, we can modify that conclusion along the lines of the mayor just outlined to say, here's how we got here, here's what the proposal was.
That's all.
The allowable.
Just-
That's
All right, we'll
easy
just
do.
to move
bring-
along, we'll just
We'll include that.
We'll do a quick narrative like that, and we'll not quibble over whether it's required or not. But you're saying you want to just capture the story in the record.
Right.
Okay,
Well,
we'll do
again,
that.
if we're going to introduce something, there needs to be a finding or conclusion that
All right.
supports that.
Jason, we can do that and bring that back on Monday?
Yeah, we'll work on that.
And then we'll just review that small list of items when we come back on Monday. All right. Councilmember Sonwell, you're fine?
No, I'm good, Jeff.
Okay. All right, if there's no other questions or comments on conditions of approval, item 1, we'll move on to item 2.
All right, this one is the affordable housing condition. So there's a little addition there on the first page, which is page 5. And then if you flip the page to page 6, here's where we make the major changes. And so you'll see the first one there is, and this is the one I read verbally to the council on Monday night. The first addition you'll see on the top of page 6 is the 50 years. And then you'll see all the strike-throughs in the council, you'll call motion to remove that. And then at the end, there's new additional language which is a little more generalized. And this was based on council's request that staff look at some general language.
I'll just give everybody a couple minutes to read through that, but if you want to launch in, Councilmember Mayhew. Do you want to wait for everybody to read that for a couple minutes so they're all listening to what you have to say? Let's just pause. We'll pause for a moment. Everybody's. I just want to make sure everybody's hearing your comments or questions. Because I see everybody reading right now. It's kind of like watching who's finishing the test. All right, Jim, why don't you go ahead?
All right, so my questions are just around the two particular words that are used. And on the second underlined section where it says, and that the units be committed to, et cetera, okay? My question is first around the word committed. And just, I'm not as familiar with these documents, as others are.
You mean word required rather than committed, or?
Restricted or required as opposed, committed appears to
That
me to be
language
somewhat weak.
comes out of the statute, but also note that the remainder of the sentence, as originally drafted, is still there. So committed to continuing affordability through deed restrictions or other provisions acceptable to the city. So that the commitment to affordability is ensured through some mechanism that the council would approve as part of the affordable housing.
I didn't see that language. Somehow I
Easy
thought
to
that was
miss
all.
in the strikeout.
Yeah, I
sure.
thought it was all struck out. So
Gotcha.
that's
Right,
okay,
but
committed
but
through
yeah,
deed restriction. Okay, that's fine. That addresses my question.
Your
My
your
sec-
observation is right. It's somewhat odd language, but given that we're looking at this section of the GMA, I just borrowed the language straight from the
That's,
statute.
I'm fine, it makes sense, thank you for explaining that. So, then there's this word, the other is continuing affordability, and I was just wondering if that should be more specifically defined, such as at X percent of AMI, or some specific
That's in the
definition of what we
development
mean.
agreement already.
Okay.
Which is 80%.
Uh-huh. And so this use of the word continuing affordability,
We can add a cross-reference to the development agreement there if that the council would like.
So 80% is what we had pretty much through similar formulas to Snoqualmie Ridge. Are we also offering them more credits per unit for lower, dropping that AMI to where they could?
Not based on credits in this, it was just a strict percentage of unit count.
There's nothing stopping them from doing so, but there's no credit for it.
So just to be clear, then, we'll add some wording, either specifying the 80% of AMI or cross-referencing to where that's defined?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Councilmember Summerall.
Can someone just explain to me the difference, kind of what affordable housing programs may apply to different areas of the city and how that compares to on-site units are preferred, however off-site is an option? I don't understand. Maybe I don't understand F at all.
So just for reference, because not everybody may have this, I provide a version with the rationale in italics, and so I briefly summarize the relevant sections of the Growth Management Act. So it's subsections E through H there. And subsection F, I summarize as affordable housing programs may apply to different areas of the city. This would allow, and this really works more for larger cities. They can essentially, if you will, have a different affordable housing requirement in different areas of the city, provided that city, makes the very appropriate findings and everything, that they have a different demands for affordable housing in different areas. That may not apply here, but that's going to be for the council to determine at a later date.
Oh, so this is cut and paste from the GMA?
Correct.
Okay, so I get it.
Yeah, this is just because there's the reference to RCW's 3670A 540 sub 2 sub E through H.
So
and it doesn't
those
tell you
listed
what
there,
those
but not
are.
limited to those. At the end of the day, it's still up to our discretion. These are just a few options that are mentioned. There could be others.
Correct.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right, in the spirit of round robin, I'm going to go to Councilmember Jeans and Councilmember Lissay, then Shepherd. Or I'm sorry, Councilmember Jean Shepherd, then Lissay.
One of the basic tenets of affordable housing is that it ought to make sense for the city, and it ought to make sense for the people who live there. To make sense for the people who live there, in its best sense, it is most desirable to have it in locations that are close to busing, that are close to buying groceries, other practical kinds of things. And that location, to me, is not very practical for affordable housing. So it might be in our best interest, serving our citizens who need affordable housing, to perhaps locate it in locations that are otherwise acceptable to us, and it would certainly make more sense to the people who live there.
Councilmember Shepherd, then Lissay.
So I'm not an expert on affordable housing, but when we started campaigning, the first batch of people that confronted our group was about affordable housing. And as I started drilling into it, I realized just how darn complicated it all is. And right now, I'm not really satisfied with off-the-top opinions of council members as far as how affordable housing should be approached. I really feel we needed a professional group such as Arch to come in and give us some guidance on how we should approach these things. Right now, this is really poorly worded. I'm sure it's cut and paste from our codes that we are supposed to conform to, but it really is super unclear. And I'd like to see a lot more clarity to this aspect of the conditions that we have. I'm just super uncomfortable with one of the things that I've been told is the last thing you want to do is to have all your affordable housing in one concentrated area, which would mean if you want to keep it near transportation, then you would have it all clustered together. And so we really need some guidance on this. I think there's a lot of variety that could happen that would be beneficial both to the developer and to the community if we got better guidance on this.
So would you support doing an affordable housing plan?
I'm sorry?
So would you support doing an affordable housing study or plan then?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we'll do that and we'll get guidance.
Yeah.
I would, in defense of past, I'm very proud of what this community's accomplished, even stuff that was put underway long before I came to this city. And I've been to numerous affordable housing conferences around this area over the past, 15 years or more. And I'll challenge any community on the east side to demonstrate that they've, on a proportional basis, delivered more affordable housing for their communities than Snoqualmie has. We've done, in fact, there's been years where we put more affordable housing on the market than the entire east side combined. So it could be done better, and there's certainly flaws in formulas. It's a very complex subject. but I wouldn't make apologies for what we've done to date. Councilmember Lissay?
I'm no expert, although I have been involved in affordable housing projects, working for clients in various locations. But at the same time, I am, and I understand the language here, that we included it more in compliance with the RCW to address some items and removed certain things that were more specific, so it gave the applicant opportunity to address others. I do want to make sure it's reiterated, though, that this council showed no support for the items that were stricken previously. So whether it's a program that may apply to different area of the cities, off-site in the general vicinity, or fee in lieu, this council has, through motion, showed no support for that effort. So I would just remind the applicant to take that in consideration as you're preparing the affordable housing plan.
Councilmember Sunwell?
So it's said a couple times in here. I want to make sure we're making really good progress tonight, and I think we can get done. The purpose of tonight is not to debate the overall affordable housing strategy of our city or even of this development. This very condition requires that there be an affordable housing plan produced by the developer that we have to approve. So it could list 20 things or no things that are options. The important thing is that the affordable housing plan shall ensure blah, 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 right? And that's, I think, what we need to focus on tonight. We'll have plenty of opportunities to debate with them and other developers who come into the area on what the houses should look like and how they should be clumped or not clumped, or should there be a bus stop. I would just encourage us, we've got some really good momentum tonight to maybe move on from this topic.
Yeah, point well made. Last thing I'll just say on that is a development agreement cuts both ways. It not only protects the community and city's interest, but it also protects the developer's interest. So I know, Brian, this is recalling that, probably the comment you were going to make too. Councilmember Shepard, I think you made some great points, but we have, that development agreement, as flawed as it might be going years back, kind of set, some limited parameters in which we can work as we move toward a final plan on this project. With that said, and Councilmember Slade, your point, I didn't interpret the council's actions to be quite as restrictive as you perhaps described, although they struck a lot of this language from the Planning Commission, as I recall. And I thought the applicant walked away with the understanding that in this language here where it says, alternatively, the affordable housing plan may include such other components or features as may be approved by the city council in its discretion, including but not limited to those identified in our RCW, et cetera. That is saying that we're holding the cards pretty close in terms of what's required here, but we're absolutely open to them proposing any kind of creative options to get to what you're talking about, Councilmember or Jeans and Shepard. I agree. I think locating this in a location where maybe there's more housing in a better location on bus lines and so forth, I don't think the council would reject if they came forward at all. I seem to recall Monday when we concluded this discussion, it was council has full control of saying if whatever you come forward with that we don't like, we can swat it away, and it defaults to this is what you have to provide as a minimum. So you've protected that 15%, but you have and they have freedom to work with this administration to come forward with some creative alternatives that might be quite satisfactory to the council. But you have full discretion to approve that or deny it. All right, if there's no other comments or questions on this item, then we'll move on to item 3.
All right. This one would modify condition 10 to add references to the expanded lower parking lot. The council had an extensive discussion about potential traffic impacts from the expanded lower parking lot and how traffic would enter and exit the facility. And so this is just making more clear that the study that would be required early on would address those impacts, if any.
Okay, if there's no questions or discussion on this item, we'll move on to, if no objection, we'll move on to item 4.
In number 4, this is making explicit that there's a requested deviation from the city's parking lot landscaping requirements. The landscaping requirements call for landscaped islands and/or peninsulas within the interior of parking lots. Conclusion 43 discusses this, and the intent here is to maximize the number of stalls possible in the expanded lower lot, and so this condition would make explicit that a deviation is approved to not have those interior landscaping, but would still require the perimeter landscaping.
Councilmember Snow.
It seems like it's been about a year or so now, but I remember we've had some interesting conversations with the ROA and Snoqualmie Ridge about how some of the common area, I guess what I call common areas, were landscape medians and things like that. First of all, is there going to be an ROA with this development? And if not, or if so, at what point would we delineate whose responsibility is what?
So this condition is specific to the expanded lower parking lot and not to the residential portion or even
That
the
was
hotel.
embarrassing. I probably should have listened more carefully.
It's okay. That's what we're here for.
Will there be an ROA?
It's 9 o'clock.
That's okay.
The applicant has previously
Until you get it.
expressed that some kind of owners association is likely,
Okay.
but that's something they would determine down the line.
Okay, my mistake for misreading that. I apologize.
It could be that all the roads internally are private. It may end up going that direction as well. So.
Okay.
But to this lot in particular, do we know who's responsible for the maintenance of landscaping around this lot once it's built? Is that PSC?
It would likely be PSC or the Muckleshoot Indian tribe, but because right now that's who the property owners are for the lower
Whoever
lot.
owns it maintains it.
That's my thought. I just wanted that clarified. Yeah.
Not
I think
the
it goes
city.
to your point. Councilmember Lasay?
I guess this is a question for the city attorney. This condition was different in the record. It was not discussed by council as being a change. I'm wondering, how does it get implemented into this document if it neither was written this way in the record or was discussed by council?
Yep. What are the conclusions and findings that support the issuance of this condition?
As noted in the italicized portion, conclusion 43 specifically speaks to parking lot landscaping and the requested deviation. And so the fact that the deviation was not explicitly approved by a condition is effectively an oversight. And because the council is the final authority, so long as it's acting within the confines, if you will, of the record, the council could certainly add, remove conditions as they see fit.
Right. My impression was this was being added, council had asked for an itemization of the deviations and have them called out specifically.
Okay.
So I thought that's what we were doing, but as Mr. Rogers said, that this is council's document ultimately, and so if you don't want to include things, you don't have, that's council's discretion.
Yeah, having read conclusion number 43, it does clearly state that the applicant has requested a deviation for landscaping peninsulas or islands within the parking lots. So it does tend to flow from that to create the clarification, so.
I think part of the rationale was it's a fairly steep hillside with a narrow area that would accommodate well for islands.
I'm just following in other council members' footsteps for making mistakes today.
I say all the time. You're allowed to make mistakes.
Councilmember Shepherd?
So is the lower lot owned by the Muckleshoot, or is it owned by PSC, or?
The lower lot, I believe, is owned by PSE, and the upper lot is owned by the Muckleshoot Indian tribe.
Well, let's clarify. The
But-
current lower lot is owned by PSC. The expanded lot that will be built in part of the right-of-way of the abandoned Tokel Road, is that going to be conveyed to or owned by the PSC or the Muckleshoots? That's your question, Councilmember Shepherd.
My question is, we've got stipulations regarding PSC's lot. Is that right? You said the lower lot?
The expanded lower lot, so the expansion, because it's a new parking facility, would need to comply with the city's code. The existing lower lot as it exists today is what it is.
And also, I think the record reflects that the Muckleshoot tribe has an easement over the lower lot. And likewise, PSE has an easement over the upper lot, hence with the upper lot going away, that parking being transferred to the lower lot.
Okay.
So that's how we got to this.
Trees.
Any further question or discussion on this item? Councilmember Mayhew?
No, I was just curious what the answer to your question was.
Yeah, thank you. Who's going to end up owning the new lot, the expanded lot, lower lot?
I would say that hasn't been fully determined yet because, as the mayor stated, part of the expanded lower lot would be on what is today the former Tokel Road right-of-way before the realignment and with the roundabout. So the applicant would need either some kind of right-of-way use permit or a street vacation to construct such a facility, but they haven't applied for either of those items yet. So it's speculative at this point.
Got it, thank you.
All right. There's no further questions on that. We'll move on to item 5.
That was,
All right, this would be a new condition, and this is the tree management plan condition. And it would require, and so for timing purposes, it is prior to the issuance of civil engineering plan approval for the hotel. And so essentially before they could start clearing trees, moving dirt, installing utilities, any of those land disturbing activities, they would have to submit to the city and get Mr. Hoffman's approval of the tree management plan, and that it lays out areas that the tree plan should, needs to address. So areas where the trees are going to remain, areas where the trees will be removed, how the applicant would deal with post-project tree maintenance and removal, whether it's from storm damage, disease, et cetera, replacement requirements, and then guidelines for ongoing maintenance.
Councilmember Sunwell.
Thought that was really well captured from my recollection of the conversation that we had. I will say in line 3, there's an extra "and" in there, just to save you some editing time.
Thank you.
And this pertains to all trees, include open space and forested areas, not just urban forest.
Tree survey "and" that identifies.
Right.
All right, if there's no further discussion or questions on this item,
It's just not.
are we ready to move on, council? Item number 7 or 6, last and final item.
All right, this is a new condition. This is the parking management plan. And the timing on this is prior to issuance of any certificate of occupancy for any hotel or associated facility. And so this would wait until pretty much close to when they would be opening the doors. And it requires the parking management plan, again, Mr. Hoffman's approval. There's criteria for identifying large events that would generate a high parking demand. Anything that requires a city special event permit would be covered by this.
Not allowed in the.
Councilor Mayhew?
so, what I'm concerned about, there's 2 things that I'm concerned about here. The first is, I don't see here, let me say it differently, sorry. So what I'm worried about is when events happen. What normal events that they will have in their facility, which I assume there will be, they're hoping will be many. So what I'm worried about is the parking and the fact that the parking that's there covers people that are staying there. And we've got the formulas that you've taken us through, and I appreciate that you said that part of that has to do with satisfying events. But what I'm worried about is overflow parking into the residential neighborhood or into the
Expanded lower lot.
that.
It's the new appurtenances.
Right. I'm frankly not that worried about how they solve beyond those locations. I think it's in their interest to solve that, and I think they're very likely to do a very good job of that. Otherwise, it'll hurt what they're trying to do. But what I don't want, or what I'm concerned about, is having that residential neighborhood flooded on a regular basis to where residents can't park. So I see some wording here about a requirement that hotel workers not park, but there's nothing about how there's nothing about requiring that they ensure that event parking doesn't go into the residential area or the expanded lot. And I was hoping to see a condition around that.
So there is language in here that says methods to address parking demand for large events that might generate spillover parking to the expanded lower parking lot and or any residential area. So certainly it requires methods to address that. does not have an outright prohibition because, as if you recall from the discussion, that would be difficult to enforce because we ultimately can't stop anybody from just going and parking anywhere where it's legal to park in the city.
Anywhere where it's what?
Where it is legal to park within the city. I could drive my car park on a city street where it is legal to park right now, and the police department couldn't stop me, tow me if if I park it for a fire hydrant, sure, but with that said, we want to, the intent here is to address that concern directly, and so certainly we, staff, have heard the council's concern about the spillover, and the parking management plan explicitly needs to address how would they deal with this.
Right, so I'm coming at this kind of a different, I think you're hitting on what I'm getting at, in that what I'm so the example I'll give you is that we have a big event that affects parking in the rest of Snoqualmie once a year, which is the Boeing Classic. During the Boeing Classic, my street is completely filled with visitors parking on the legal side and on the illegal side. Okay? Police couldn't tow if they wanted to because the illegal parking blocks the road. You couldn't actually get a tow truck through there. You also couldn't get a fire truck through there. So there is a whole plan. There's parking that the Boeing Classic provides. There's buses. There's extensive signage. So they have a whole plan in place. But the issue is trying to prevent the kind of thing I'm just... Now, to your point, well, you can make it illegal. Doesn't mean people aren't going to do it anyway. But at least you can make it illegal. So, especially with the comment that these streets might be private, I'm just trying to get at the idea of putting some kind of prohibition against that parking. I grant that enforcement is a whole nother topic, but at least if we've tried to make that, if we've had them put in some requirement to prevent that, or at least attempt to prevent that, that's what I'm trying to get at. So we don't have, because they don't have an event once a year that's big, they're going to have one multiple times a week, I suspect, they hope. And so I just don't want this to be something where a few years from now we're spending all our council time talking about this horrible ongoing parking problem where we have, and we look at the parking mitigation plan and they've done a fantastic job. The issue is people disregarding or not cooperating with their plan. So that's what I'm trying to get, is if there's some prohibitions that would protect that, the parking in that neighborhood. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Councilmember Summerall.
So again, I think back to kind of the affordable housing conversation. We could take time if we want to kind of brainstorm with those ideas. It might be signage. It might be, hey, it needs to be a gated community. Lots of different options. I think the point is that they are required to come to us with a plan. My question is does City Council have to approve that plan, or is it Mr. Hoffman that has to approve that plan?
As written, Mr. Hoffman.
If I could just say, I think I'm okay with Mr. Hoffman doing it. What I would want, though, is what I don't see is wording here in the thing that Mr. Hoffman would be trying to test that actually says something like methods to prevent or discourage event parking in this area.
It says criteria for identifying large.
Yeah, for large events that might.
Sorry, what does it say?
Methods to address parking demand for large events that might generate spillover parking to the expanded lower parking lot and/or residential area.
Right, and so that's what I'm getting, is that wording to me, and maybe I'm just reading this wrong, but to me that says they're going to put a plan in that talks about, hey, we're going to have extra demand here, we're going to have some off-site parking, we're going to have some buses, but what I'm getting at is, can something be added here that says above and beyond that, they need to do something that actually seeks to prohibit or whatever the appropriate, that actually set to protect that neighborhood from overflow parking.
I think there's two additional criteria toward the end of this. One is monitoring ongoing parking demand, and the second one is criteria and policies to address potential future parking needs. And so this is, to your hypothetical, well, what if we have a plan and nobody's following it? I would suggest then that the plan isn't working, and the plan needs to be adjusted. It's not a static.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, but not if the plan never included a plan to prevent the parking in the neighborhood. Offering an alternative is not the same as preventing or seeking, discourage, whatever, it's a different idea than what I'm bringing up.
City Attorney, jump in here.
We would follow council's lead in this regard, but it might be as simple as just changing this to read where it says to address parking demand for large events, and then insert to discourage, and then delete that might generate, so that it would say for large events to discourage spillover parking to expanded lower parking lot and or any residential
That might
area.
solve it.
Yeah, I don't know if you can outright prohibit.
That's the kind of thing I'm
You could
looking
say
for. It's
prohibit if you wanted to, that will have attendant implementation challenges.
Well, the issue may
especially
be they
for-
may not be able to prohibit. The city
Right.
may have to do the
Well,
prohibiting.
especially if it's a public street, and you don't typically prohibit parking on a public street if there's a place for parking. At least it doesn't have no parking signs.
Well, it's typical to say no parking on game day, no parking
Right.
on, so,
I
but
mean, your
those would all
issue
be
is-
actions
your
the
is-
city would have to
Yeah,
take.
your issue is an enforcement issue. We need to get
Well,
down.
that's
and
all on the city.
Scoop up the people on the no parking sign side of the street.
Yeah, that's the thing I'm getting, is having the no parking or
So if I
whatever
promise to
methods.
enforce the parking on your street in the Boyne Classic, are you good with this then, or? I'm being facetious.
I'm sorry about
Can't
that, by
hear
the
what I
way. I didn't mean to park in front of your house.
I don't mind the parking in front of my house. It's across the,
Councilmember Holloway, you had your hand up.
Yeah.
And then I'll go to Councilmember Jeans and then Councilmember Sunwell.
Okay, so
Doing a little round robin here. So.
criteria for identifying large events that may generate parking demand exceeding hotel supply. So that's a criteria to identify events. But you're requiring the parking plan for any event that requires a city special permit. 5 guys with beer and an aerial firework require a special event permit. I don't care what the parking is, I'll never know.
Aerial
So I'm not
fireworks are
sure.
prohibited by our existing code.
We've done it for the school. Nice try, but we've done it for the school. So the criteria for identification and the criteria for actually having the plan are different things. You may look at how I'll admit large events with parking will drive a special event permit, but other things drive special permits too. So you may want to limit that to special event permits involving large parking requirements.
but they may have a whole slew of
Sorry,
events.
Councilmember Mayhew, I need to go around the
that
robin.
never,
Yeah.
Councilmember Jeans, and Councilmember Sunwall, Councilmember Ross, Councilmember Shepherd.
There's always
Round robin, Jim. I'm sorry,
get on the
round
list?
robin.
I can't get on the list. Okay.
there is always a temptation.
You're after Shepherd.
There is always a temptation to try to delineate what kinds of things we think would be appropriate. And unfortunately, what that does is when creative ideas that are beyond that are proposed, maybe they can't be done because we didn't delineate it. So I wouldn't want us to try to be any more specific about this. It seems to me the applicant is as motivated as we are. The applicant doesn't want to make the residents sending them emails and phone calls and protests and so forth. Give them the opportunity to do a parking management plan because I think it is in their best interest to do that. And let's just take a look at what it is, and if we like it, we go with it. If we don't like it, we'll continue to talk. But I think that I think they are motivated. I'm not sure they're as motivated, but it seems to me they would, this is important to them too.
All right, who did I say next?
Me.
Councilmember Sunwell.
Sure. So I'm comfortable with how it's worded. We could spend a lot of time wordsmithing this. There's 6 spots I've identified in these 10, 12 lines. Criteria for a requirement that, methods to address, monitoring, criteria and policies too. There's going to be a plan, and I trust Mark doesn't want those calls, right? So because he's getting them, and I guess I'm with Bob on this one. I guess maybe I just want to go home.
Councilmember Ross, Councilmember Shepherd, then Councilmember Mayhew.
I'm fine with how it's written, but I do have a question. Do we require city special permits if it's on private property?
We could, it depends on the event.
Depends on what to do.
Certainly we have in the past. There was an event over on the mill site that we required a special event permit for example, recently. So it's not, they happen. But it depends on the nature of the event. It's case by case.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Shepherd.
So what I'd like to do is have somebody from the police department, fire department, review this requirement and get just their take on what we're looking at and if they have any input.
They always do on every binding site improvement plan. They review it for, particularly like fire department, for egress, ingress, fire trucks and things like that, which is why they have no parking signs on the other side of the street from Jim, and they shouldn't be parking there because you need fire trucks and tow trucks to get down there.
That's correct, and special event permits, and typically when there's a question about parking itself, they point it to planning.
Councilmember Mayhew.
I think when we follow a practice, that when one council member disagrees with another one, they just get to talk, and we do nothing. And then when another council member does the same thing, we cut them off. I think we've got a problem. Okay? The second thing I'll tell you is when you don't let someone express a concern and get that out, you leave them one option, and that is to vote no. So if that's the option you want to leave, fine, we can move on.
Councilmember Mayhew, in all due respect, you probably spoke alone more time than the other council members combined. I feel I afforded you plenty of time. Did you speak quite a bit too? You want credit for speaking? All right, I'll give you credit for speaking a lot too.
I feel like I get counseled more than
This discussion is not ended. The council certainly respectfully listen to any further concerns you want. Did you want to make a motion or a suggestion that the word discourage be entered there? I'm not trying to be unresponsive to it too. I'm just struggling with how we write a prohibition without restricting a street that's designed for public parking, or if it's a private street, how we manage that. I'd like to get there. Unless you guys can have a suggestion. Otherwise,
Given the hour, I'm fine with the condition as written.
Councilor May, then Councilor Lassay.
Mayor, if the criteria for council members speaking is a time limit,
No, sir.
then please, let's implement a time limit methodology. That's allowed for under Robert's Rules of Order, but then let's do that. But I think to criticize a council member for speaking when we have no time limit, I think that's out of order.
That was my point. I think you were unfairly criticizing your fellow council members for having an opportunity to speak. I was trying to give everybody an opportunity to speak in the spirit of round robin. Councilor Lassay.
Question for the director. If it wasn't at the hour we currently are you still comfortable with the condition as written? Let's assume it's 9:30 in the morning and you've had your coffee and the mayor said you're doing a great job because you always do. How would you feel about it then?
Given the fact that such plan is required, and we know what the input was, and the wording in the condition, and whatever we accomplished in that plan would cover all of these scenarios. It may not be perfect for every instance. We may still get phone calls, but I guarantee you those phone calls are going to come to planning. They always do. And that's where it starts. And so the words in here, such as methods to address, are intended to eliminate or at least minimize impacts. So we could wordsmith it and add a keyword, discourage. I would hesitate to add, and I don't think this was suggested, prohibit, because then that's the unintended consequences. If it ends up being public streets and it becomes a bigger enforcement battle to explain why you can't park on a public street at Salish, but you can downtown or the Ridge, that to me is unintended consequence. I think the focus of my review and what comes out of this final plan is that impacts are eliminated or minimized to the greatest extent that we can.
Councilor Sunwell.
So down the road, when this parking plan, along with the tree plan, comes to you, would it be your normal practice to just make that decision based on with consultation from staff? Or is that something you would typically bring like to the CDC committee? To say, hey, what do you guys think? Just typical, I'm not asking what you should, I'm just saying, what would be your typical, would this be handled at your desk?
There is no typical.
Okay.
Generally, it's a gut feeling from years of experience. If it's clear cut and I feel like I'm bothering anybody to ask them, that's probably a pretty black and white criteria.
Right.
Generally, if it's something that I can anticipate, wow, there's a gray area, or I need to share this, I reach out for staff. If it goes to a level of we're not even talking to policy yet, but if it goes to, hey, put your eyes on it, what do you think? Then I have administration. And if I want to go broader, I bring it to senior staff. If for this particular thing, it rose to the level of, hey, what really does this condition read as in plain English? Let's go to the CD committee and see what their opinion is. In this wording right now, it would not require us to go to CD committee, but that option is available for a clarification, but not approval of the plan. So all those levels are available in the moment when I know the criteria and I know the specific action. But what's very clear is the intent, the policy captured here. I know that. Now it comes to the fine level of detail. How do we implement it in the field? I have faith we'll get it right.
Councilmember Mayo, I know this administration values your vote and your perspective on this matter. The only two things I've heard that might satisfy, or at least move it in that direction, your support is using what the city attorney stated about using the word discourage or some slight modification in the language. And I don't know if you wanted to ask your council members to consider that.
I think they've made their position clear.
I'm sorry?
I think they've made their position clear.
Well, I never heard anyone recommend change. Did you want to request that change? I mean, the other one.
I've already heard my fellow council members say they're fine with the wording as it is. I know how to count to 4,
Okay.
so I'm done with it. I don't agree with it, so I now have a tough choice to make on voting, and I think that's unfortunate because I think the city attorney's suggestion, I just don't understand why that's objectionable.
Okay. I don't find it to be objectionable. I don't think the applicant does either. Councilmember Shepherd, then Councilmember Sunwell.
I didn't have my hand up.
Oh, we thought we.
I thought she did earlier.
Sorry, Councilmember Sunwell.
I would suggest that just because we're comfortable with how it is, doesn't mean we wouldn't be comfortable with adding later. This is a body of compromise, and I didn't read from anybody that adding the word discourage would somehow flip the tables. I think what's most important is, I think in any body of anything, but particularly the body that we're in, I think the more all in that we can have, whether that's a yes vote or a no vote, the better. So I would move that we add the word discourage to that.
Can you restate that and then just say move?
No, because I have no idea. It wasn't my idea.
No. Oh.
Oh, so I would move to add the word discourage in whatever place he said, because I think it adds further clarification, and I'd be even more fine with that than how I am now. And I think it would address at least one concern that exists. And I'm all for some more unanimity on that.
So I was going to suggest that the city attorney could read that, and you could say move to
That'd be
state by
great.
the city attorney. I'm sorry, there's a motion going on the table, and then we'll go ahead. Bob, if you could state that again.
Sure. So this is in the center of this proposed condition, the clause that begins methods to address parking demand for large events. I would strike the words that might generate and insert in their place in order to discourage and or minimize.
That.
So then it would read, that clause, methods to address parking demand for large events in order to discourage and or minimize spillover parking to the expanded lower parking lot and or any residential area.
So moved.
As stated by the city attorney.
Second.
As stated by the.
All right, we have a motion and a second as stated by the city attorney.
All right.
Motion and a second by Councilmember Sunwell as stated by the city attorney. Any further discussion?
Well,
Jim, you had your hand up first. All right. Councilmember Jeans and Councilmember Holloway. Councilmember Jeans?
I'm just trying to locate where discourage is going to be.
It's going to be right.
It's discouraging.
It's more than a word, yeah.
It's,
Right in the middle.
And or
Seventh-
minimize
seventh line.
spillover. It's right there. So just
So you need legal
Process-
documents that have to.
cross up generate.
yeah, it's the seventh line down.
Sixth word in.
If you see, it says plan portion of the site, semicolon, methods to address parking demand for large events. Strike the words that might generate and replace those words where it would be demand for large events in order to discourage and or minimize spillover parking to the expanded lower parking lot and or residential area. Okay, does everybody understand that?
Mayor, can I make another comment? Just, no one has proposed this, but just by way of example of, the other end of the spectrum, if you did want to prohibit parking on private streets, there's a mechanism that's used in other cities to do that. It's called a residential parking zone, or RPZ. And that has to be passed by an ordinance, designated on a map, and then residents in that area have to come in and buy a permit, and they get a sticker to put on their car when they want to park, and then they call the police or Mark when there's a car parked out there that doesn't have that sticker, and then the city has to try to enforce it. And just an example, when I lived out nearby Wrigley Field in Chicago, when I went to law school, there was an RPZ because of game night, and no one who was coming to visit could park in the neighborhood. There's an RPZ adjacent to the state capitol campus in Olympia because of the concern of lobbyists taking up parking in that area, and so even residents have to get that. That wasn't effective, and then the city's trying to now regulate whether lobbyists can rent houses that aren't their primary residence to live nearby. So it's just an example. I'm not saying you can't do it. It comes with implementation challenges.
Yeah.
That's the most common mechanism to do it, if that's where the council would want to head.
Well, and that's what's going on in my head too. I'm always concerned about the law of unintended consequences, where the other effect is you have a big party and a bunch of friends come over to visit, no one can park on the street or visit your house because there's no parking available, so.
Along the lines of unintended consequences, in towns that I've worked in, we did not do that because it takes away from the ambiance and the tourism. When you visit a place, you don't want to feel like it's more restrictive than the place you just came from. So when you see a permit parking and so forth,
So given the late hour, I'm going to ask that we focus on the motion. Councilmember Shepherd?
Well, I was just, I think that Councilmember Mayhew misunderstood what I had stated. I would be much more comfortable talking to the police and fire department and getting their guidance on what they see as maybe a best direction to go on this. I have no idea I think that is a concern. I don't know how significant. It may not be significant. I really have no idea.
All right, any further discussion, council? All right, we'll go to a vote. All those in favor of the amendment?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
No, I don't care.
All right.
That's the first vote for I don't care in a year and a half.
The motion is approved. All right, so any other discussion for this item, council?
I'll just say, I'm still concerned that Five Guys with a Bonfire requires a parking plan, but Mark, if you're willing to review all of those, go for it. Good.
Wait, this is a parking plan for every single event that takes place, or? Oh, the large ones.
No, it says every special event permit.
well, which I review anyway.
The requirement is that the plan would address parking for anything that requires a special event permit.
You don't do the plan over again, you get to, the plan is done at the beginning.
He's from Idaho, he likes bonfires.
Plus, every special event permit goes through at least I think all senior staff.
Well, I don't read it this way. It talks about special event plans, but then it also says, in addition, it's basically saying with a semicolon, in addition to that, a requirement the hotel workers shall not park in the expanded parking lot or the residential neighborhood. And in addition to that, you'll develop methods to address parking demand for large events and avoiding
And
residential.
I have no argument that large events drive this review of parking. I have argument that a special event permit of, again, 5 guys with a bonfire require this.
They won't be required to have a special event permit. It doesn't say that at all here.
No, wait a minute, let's back up. 5 guys with a bonfire, regardless of where they were, or let's put it another way, 5 guys with an aerial mortar
Are you describing our alley during the 4th of July or what?
would require a special event permit. And this says, because it's a special event permit, parking plan must address.
I'm not familiar with anybody having to get a bonfire special event permit, but I don't want to belabor the argument here.
Well, let me put it a different way. Excessive parking is not the only reason for requiring a special event permit.
Correct.
Okay? So all those other reasons that are now excluded by that statement now require you to review the parking plan and say, things are good.
Well, the example I would have is Nicole would send out the special event permit for review and/or condition. For this area, I would review it, hey, is it consistent with the approved parking management plan or not? I do that for the Ridge, Ridge 2, et cetera already.
Yeah,
Councilor Muslim?
So I disagree. So if you look at this, it says the requirement that the plan, capitalized P, this plan, okay? A requirement that that this parking plan be required for any event that requires it's referring to anything that occurs on this site. It's not 5 guys, a bonfire, and marshmallows
It could be 5 guys and marshmallows on this site.
on the hotel site,
All right, I'm going to rule 5 guys and marshmallows.
which
not
it's
germane to the
private
discussion.
property and
Let's go 5 guys with an aerial mortar. But I
a
give-
pink flamingo.
I
Yes, good idea.
I make a motion, we adjourn.
Wait, before,
I second.
that's what I,
Okay, well, the motion's on the table.
All right, so
Any discussion?
Motion?
have a motion and a second.
so there's a second.
Yeah, any discussion on the motion and a second? Go ahead.
So I'm all for adjourning. I'd like to understand what Monday looks like. By the way, unbelievable job pulling this together, sir. I mean, I had no idea we would get through this, so thank you to everyone who made this happen.
Well, we
Point of order, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
The motion is on adjournment. We should be discussing that. Is it talking about
Thank
that
you.
stuff is not
Point of-
germane
point of
currently?
sustain-
I retract my motion, let's just get through with this.
Thank you.
Okay.
Peggy, are you pulling the second back?
There's nothing to second. So I just want to understand what Monday looks like.
Yeah.
So if we can talk about Monday, then we leave.
We will bring, so the council has identified some addition, a couple little changes here and there, for example, on one of these conclusions, just add in some, the existing part of conclusion one, so you can see the whole thing. So we'll do things like that, clean this up, get it back to you. You're going to get this by the end of the week, so you're going to have the whole weekend to look at it. The resolution will not change because we didn't identify any changes, and we will work to get a complete document with incorporating all these changes, so you can see that as a whole.
So we start Monday on this, we debate it, we theoretically vote on it, and any leftover time, we go into budget.
Yeah, we actually talked about that earlier today. We anticipated that, given what Jason quickly produced, we thought, gosh, you guys might get through this tonight to where we can, Robert was pretty excited about getting that time back
Here.
on Monday to devote to budget.
I would like to ask the council, it's been notified for this coming up on Monday night, as well as the budget discussion. I guess the question is, when would council want to consider this item or this issue? Do you want to have it earlier on in the sessions, or do you want to have it in the evenings for other folks who be
This is the
attending?
long pole in the tent.
Well, it
We
would
gotta
be
get this-
first, so we would know how much time to devote to the budget then.
Okay.
Actually, Mr. Mayor, if I can ask
Councilor
council's,
Lissay, I will get to you.
council's preference on the documents. Right now, the draft resolution refers to as Exhibit 1, the document that the Planning Commission, their resolution and their findings, all 32 pages. And then in the operative sections of the resolution says, council adopts and affirms all of those of the Planning Commission with the exception of the ones that are modified in Exhibit 2. And so there are 2 attachments, one the Planning Commission version and one with the changed versions. Because that was the fastest way for us to get you one document to look at with changes. We could carry that forward, or we could merge them so you have one set of complete findings, conclusions, conditions as modified, and have only one attachment. What do you, how much do you want to look at is the
I would like
question.
to avoid amended and restated findings and conclusions. So can we just have a clean set that says, this is the council finding conclusions and conditions?
When there were just a handful of 2 or 3 items that needed follow-up, like the little, adding a
Yeah.
fine, and we'll just bring one sheet of paper with those and then a clean.
Well, Mayor, what I'm understanding is then we would take this document and merge it into
Yes.
the 32 pages.
Are we going
Right.
to do a red line?
Yes.
And we can do it as a red line.
Yeah. We would provide you essentially the clean version that you would actually adopt if that's what you want to do, and then we give you a red line version as an exhibit so you can see everything we are doing.
When I was thinking they might want a brief summary of just where to find those
Yeah,
few-
the one
they add
page.
like
Here's
a
everything that
paragraph of
changed.
things today, and you could just put that on one cover sheet to say, here's these changes you had, and here's where you'll find them. And then the red line, the clean version that you can vote on. Sorry, Bob, if you're having a hard time hearing, yell at me.
No, I'm just cringing.
You're having a hard time, you're having a hard time understanding me, okay.
So is that the consensus of council to do it that way?
Yeah.
Yes, merge it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, Bob, do your work.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to adjourn tonight's meeting. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried.
Thank you, guys. That was great work.
I didn't mean to cut you off for the applause, because you deserve it. You
Nice.
did great, Jason.